Hello brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of my History of Islam series, episode 4. So today, we're going to be delving more into the Islamic conquest of Spain and of India during the 10th and 11th centuries. God bless you all. Hope you enjoy it, brothers and sisters. God bless you all. The jihad in Spain slowed down considerably in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. In fact, the Christian domains in Spain were growing, but very slowly, and amid many setbacks. As in all wars, long and short, matters became complicated. On occasion, Christians and Muslims forged alliances for short-term goals. Whatever the utility of these coalitions of convenience, and however successful they were, the jihad imperative remained a constant, and there was never any shortage of Muslims in Al-Andalus who were ready to pursue it. In 920, the forces of the Emirate of Cordoba routed the Christians of the Kingdom of Leon, the successor to Pelayo's Kingdom of Asturias, at Valdejuncera, but those who were determined to resist the jihad were by no means wiped out, and they fought on. From 929 on, the Umayyad rulers of Spain styled themselves as Caliphs of Cordoba. The Caliphate, and Islamic Al-Andalus in general, has become a potent myth in the 21st century. Historians have promoted it as a paradise of proto-multiculturalism. Armstrong, author of Islam: A Short History, claims that until 1492, Jews and Christians lived peaceably and productively together in Muslim Spain, a coexistence that was impossible elsewhere in Europe. Historian Rosa Menacal asserts that the Muslim rulers of Spain not only allowed Jews and Christians to survive, but following Quranic mandate, by and large protected them. This myth has come to be taken for granted in the West. In his June 4, 2009 outreach speech to the Muslim world from Cairo, President Barack Obama said, "Islam has a proud tradition of tolerance. We see it in the history of Andalusia." Yet Umayyad Spain in reality was hardly a comfortable place for the Christians and Jews who were subjugated there under the rule of Islam. Several decades after the Umayyads proclaimed their caliphate in Cordoba, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I sent an emissary, John of Gauls, to Muslim Spain. John of Gauls noted that the Christians of Al-Andalus were living in fear and suffering under the burden of systematic discrimination, but when he proposed informing Otto I about the plight of the Christians in Al-Andalus, the Spanish bishop told him that to do so would only make matters worse. "Consider," he told John, "under what conditions we live. We have been driven out to this by our sins, to be subjected to the rule of the pagans. We are forbidden by the apostles' words to resist the civil power. Only one cause of solace is left to us, that in the depths of such a great calamity they do not forbid us to practice our own faith. For the time being then we keep the usual counsel, that provided no harm is done to our religion, we obey them in all else, and do their commands in all that does not affect our faith." Dhimmis throughout the ages have enunciated a similar philosophy. Islamic law forbade the dhimmis to complain about their state on pain of forfeiting their contract or protection. Dhimmi communities therefore learned to put up with the most humiliating degradation in silence, for fear that if they said anything about their condition to anyone, it would only become even more precarious and dangerous. So as we can see, brothers and sisters, Muslims have a very bullying streak in them. Even Menacal grants that the lives of the dhimmis in Al-Andalus were severely restricted. The dhimmi, as these covenanted peoples were called, were granted religious freedom, not forced to convert to Islam. They could continue to be Jews and Christians, and as it turned out, they could share in much of the Muslim social and economic life. In return for this freedom of religious conscience, the peoples of the book, pagans, had no such privilege, were required to pay a special tax. No Muslims paid taxes, and to observe a number of restrictive regulations. Christians and Jews were prohibited from attempting to proselytize Muslims, from building new places of worship, from displaying crosses or ringing bells. In sum, they were forbidden most public displays of their religious rituals. The Umayyad laws were designed to emphasize that Muslims had the dominant position in society, and that the Christians of Spain were decidedly inferior. It was made unpleasant, expensive, and dangerous to live daily life as a Christian, so that the victory supremacy of Islam was reinforced regularly. Dhimmi Christians also knew that all they had to do to end this daily discrimination, sporadic harassment and persecution was to convert to Islam. Many did convert because it was miserable to live as a Christian in Al-Andalus. Christians could never be sure that they would not be harassed. One contemporary account tells of priests being pelted with rocks and dung by Muslims on the way to the cemetery. The dhimmis also suffered severe economic hardship. Paul Alvarez, a 9th century Christian in Cordoba, complained about the unbearable tax that Muslims levied on Christians. Nor could Christians say anything about their lot, because it was prescribed by Islamic law. Criticising Islam, Muhammad or the Koran in any matter was a death penalty offence, as it is today in many Islamic countries, so-called Islamic countries. In 850, Perfectus, a Christian priest, engaged a group of Muslims in conversation about Islam. His opinion of the conqueror's religion was not positive. Perfectus was part of the Cordoba martyrs, which were about 50 to 100 and more Christians that were killed for their faith. For this, Perfectus was arrested and put to death. Not long thereafter, another Cordoba martyr, Joannes, a Christian merchant, was said to have invoked Muhammad's name in the south pitch. He was lashed and given a lengthy prison sentence. Christian and Muslim sources contain numerous records of similar incidents in the early part of the 10th century. Around 910, in one of many such episodes, a woman was executed for proclaiming that Jesus was God and that Muhammad had lied to his followers. The Christians outside of the Caliphate did not forget their oppressed brethren, and there were periodic confrontations, large and small, between those who wanted to restore Christian Spain and the warriors of jihad who continued to strike out at the resistance they were facing in conquering the northern portion of the Iberian Peninsula. In 939, the Christians, under the leadership of King Ramiro II of Leon, met the forces of jihad under the command of Al-Rahman III, the Caliph of Cordoba, at Simanicus, also known as Al-Handega, in northwestern Spain. Abdul al-Rahman was a scrupulous, doctrinaire Muslim ruler. The 11th century Muslim historian Hayyan of Cordoba recounted, God protected the people of Al-Andalus, preserving their religion from calamity thanks to the prince of the believers, whom God wanted as a caliph who followed in the steps of his ancestors, adhering closely to scripture and became the Sunnah. It is not surprising, considering his careful adherence to Islamic law, that Al-Rahman III was harsh with his Christian prisoners. Hayyan detailed a typical incident. Muhammad chose the 100 most important barbarians, that is Christians, and sent them to the Alcazar of Cordoba, where they arrived of the Umada. But since Nasir was vacationing in the orchard of Nouria, they were taken there, their marching coinciding with the people's exiting from the Al-Hamma Mosque of Cordoba. Upon the conclusion of the Friday prayers, that many gathered and followed to see what end the prisoners would have. And it turned out that Nasir was installed in the upper balcony over the orchard facing the river to watch the execution. Defeated, the prisoners arrived, shackled and carried by Allah. Like an angry lion, he looked at them, surrounded by wild lions and dragons, and in plain sight of everyone, your sword annihilated them. Al-Rahman III was also notorious for his cruelty toward the dhimmis. Hayyan related one sadly representative incident. I must say that I've heard from ulama. Ulama are basically like the lawgivers, the lawyers. Generationally close to that dynasty, about the brutality of an Nasir el-Din towards the women that were under his protection and discretion, similar to what he showed in public toward men, according to the word of the principal ones among his most intimate servants, eunuchs who lived in his house and witnessed his high personal life. A female slave who was one of his most highly regarded favourites, but whose haughty personality did not bend easily to his vanity, had remained with him alone in one of his leisure days to drink in the garden of Azara, a palace that he had built for his favourite sexual slave that contained 300 baths, 400 horses, 15,000 eunuchs and servants, and a harem of 6,300 women, sitting by his side until drinking had an effect on him, and he threw upon her face to kiss and bite her, and she got disgusted by this and turned her face away, raining on his parade. This so provoked his anger that he ordered the eunuchs to seize her and put a candle to her face, burning and destroying her beauty until they destroyed her face, burned her badly and finished him with her, one of his worst actions. The 10th century Catholic nun, Votzwiza von Gandersheim, recorded that Al-Rahman also happened upon a 13-year-old Christian boy who had been taken hostage. Entranced by the boy's beauty, the caliph made amorous advances upon him, only to be rejected. Enraged, he had the boy tortured and then beheaded. On another occasion, another one of his sex slaves found himself bearing the brunt of the caliph's anger. Hayyan recounted his executioner, Abu Imran, whom he always had at the ready with his instruments, and that one night he called him to his room in the palace of Noura, where Yahya had slept with his sword and leather floor mat. He then entered the room where Al-Rahman was drinking and found him squatting like a lion, sitting on his paws in the company of a girl, beautiful like an onyx, who was being held by his eunuchs, in the corner of the room, he was asking for mercy, while he answered her in the grossest manner. He then told Yahya, "Take that whore, Abu Imran, cut her neck." I said I procrastinated, asking him again what was my custom, but he told me, "Cut it, so may Allah cut your hand. If not, put down your own neck." And a servant brought her close to me, gathering up her braids, so that with one blow I made her head fly, but the strike of the blade made an abnormal noise, although I had not seen it hit anything else but the neck. Afterwards they took away the body of the girl. I cleared my sword on the leather mat. I rolled up the mat and I left, but when I returned to my own room and I unfolded the mat, there appeared in it pearls big and shiny, mixed with jacinths and topazes that shone like red-hot coals, all of which I gathered in my hands, and I hurried to take it to Nasir. He rejected it immediately and told me, "We knew they were there, but we wanted to give them to you as a gift. Take it, and may Allah bless it to you." And with it I bought this house. Al-Rahman III was no more merciful toward his own people. According to Ahyan, I must also mention a horror with which Nasir terrorized people, which was by means of lions to make their punishment even more terrible, an action more proper to the tyrannical kings of the Orient, in which he imitated them, having the lions brought to him by the kings on the North African coast, since they are not animals proper to Al-Andalus. The 11th century cleric Ibn Hazm of Cordoba added that Al-Rahman's cruelty sometimes had a racial element. Al-Rahman al-Nasir was not far from his great-grandfather Al-Hakam Hassam in the way he threw himself into sin, committed doubtful acts, abusing his subjects, giving himself cynically to pleasure, punishing with cruelty and caring little for the effusion of blood. He was the one who hanged the sons of the blacks from the well of his palace as a sort of counterweight to draw water, making them die, and he had his impudent buffoon Rasis in a cortege with sword and helmet, when in fact she was a shameless old woman, not to mention other things that Allah knows better. In a small bit of retribution for all this savagery, Al-Rahman III and the Muslims were barely beaten at Samarkand and the jihadi army utterly wiped out. Al-Rahman III managed to escape with his life, but although he remained caliph of Cordoba until his death, in 961, he never again led the warriors of jihad onto the field of battle against infidels. This was no indication, however, that he blamed himself for the disaster at Samarkand. Upon his return to Cordoba after the defeat, the caliph ordered the crucifixion of 300 of his top officers. Ibn Hayyan recounted that he ordered an attic built above the highest floor of one wing of his palace specifically for this purpose. He put alminas and 10 door-like openings in it, which are turrets, having prepared 10 high crosses, each one placed in front of each door of the attic, an arrangement that awed the people who did not know his purpose, and therefore more people came to watch than ever before. When the army arrived, he ordered the Al-Medina to arrest 10 of the principal officers of the army, the first ones to break ranks on the day of Al-Handanga, who were there in the ranks, whom he named and ordered to be placed on the crosses, which was done by the executioners right away, leaving them crucified among their supplications for mercy and pardon, which only increased his anger and insults, while letting him know they had let him down. Crucifixion was the punishment the Koran prescribed in chapter 5 verse 33 for those who make war upon Allah and his messenger, similar to the Romans. Apparently Al-Rahman considered that they had done that by the incompetent management of the battle against the Christians at Samarkand. An onlooker later recalled, "I was caught in the midst of the crowd and turned away my eyes, almost fainting with horror at the sight, and such was my state that a thief stole my pack without my noticing it. It's a terrible day that scared people for a long time afterwards." However, even with the decimation of the Caliphate's army, the Christians were too riven by infighting to take full advantage of the situation. The Caliphate of Cordoba continued to exist, to strike terror into the enemies of Allah as the Quran ordered from 860. In 981, the de facto Cordoban ruler Al-Mansur, who had usurped the caliph's powers, sacked Zamora and killed 4,000 Christians, levelling 1,000 Christian villages and destroying their churches and monasteries. This roused the 20-year-old King Ramiro III of Leon, who had become king at age 5 upon the death of his father Sancho the Fat, to action. But Al-Mansur was far more experienced, knowledgeable and ruthless than Ramiro, who showed how outmatched he was as Al-Mansur, defeated him 3 times in quick succession. Emboldened by victory, Al-Mansur began conducting regular jihad raids into Christian lands. In 985 he sacked Barcelona. The following year he destroyed Leon, burning monasteries as he went. As he pursued the jihad against the Christian domains of northern Spain, Al-Mansur also determined to enhance the glory of his capital. He set a squadron of Christian slaves, their legs and irons, to the task of expanding, beautifying the Mosque of Cordoba. In 997 he destroyed Santiago de Compostela, the city that housed the famous shrine of St. James, known as Santiago Matamoros or St. James of Moorslayer. As the warriors destroyed the shrine, they saved the gates and bells for the mosque at Cordoba. Islam forbade bells, but they could be melted down and put to other uses. Newly enslaved Christians, captured at Santiago de Compostela, carried these precious balls back to Cordoba on their shoulders. Almanzor continued to pursue the jihad against the Christians of Spain with consistent success, becoming notorious among the Christians of Spain as he did so. When he died, a Christian monk, bitter over the devastation he had wrought upon the native population of Spain, wrote him in a succinct epitaph. Almanzor died in 1002, he was buried in hell. After the death of Almanzor, there was no leader of comparable strength ready to take his place. The Muslims in Spain were beset with infighting. Berbers from North Africa entered Spain and challenged Umayyad authority. Taking Cordoba in 1013, they began massacring Jews and initiated a wholesale slaughter of Jews in Granada. The Caliphate of Cordoba came to an end in 1031 as the last Umayyad Caliph, Hisham III, was imprisoned and exiled, and the Muslim chieftains who ruled the various regions of Muslim Spain could not agree on a successor. Al-Andalus henceforth became a collection of small Muslim emirates and fiefdoms. In the early 1060s, King Fernando I of Leon won a series of victories over the four most important of these small Muslim states: Taifas, Zaragoza, Toledo, Badajoz, and Valencia. In a turnabout, the jizya, he forced them to pay tribute. In 1064, he successfully laid siege to the fortress city of Coimbra, freed most of Portugal from Islamic rule. God bless this man, brothers and sisters. After he died, those who were grateful for his stand against the jihad began to refer to him as Ferdinand the Great. Meanwhile, in the disarray, lack of central authority and overall weakness of Muslim Spain in the middle of the 11th century led to no lessening of the plight of religious minorities, since that plight was mandated in the core tenets of Islam. Jews in Al-Andalus sometimes had it even worse than Christians did. In the middle of the 11th century, a Jew named Samuel ibn Nagrilla gained the trust of the Muslim rulers and was granted political power in Granada. Later, Samuel's son Joseph also held positions of great honour and responsibility. Islamic law mandated that a non-Muslim could not hold authority over a Muslim, but as with all legal systems, there are some people who flout the rules, and periods of relaxation in which the rules are simply ignored. However, the Muslims in Granada knew Islamic law and were considerably resentful of the power of Samuel, later of Joseph. The Muslim jurist Abu Ishaq composed verses addressed to the Berber king Baldis that vividly demonstrate the Muslim conviction that Muslims must enjoy a place superior to that of the dhimmis. Of Granada's Muslim ruler, Ishaq wrote, "He has chosen an infidel as a secretary when he could, had he wished, have chosen a believer. Through him the Jews have become great and proud and arrogant, they who were among the most abject, and have gained their desires and attained the utmost, and this happened suddenly before they even realised it. And how many a worthy Muslim humbly obeys the vilest ape among these miscreants? This did not happen through their own efforts, but through one of our own people who rose as their accomplice. Oh, why did he not deal with them, following the example set by pious leaders, put them back where they belong, and reduce them to the lowest of the low? Scrabbling in the dunghills for coloured rags to shroud their dead for burial, these low-born people would not be seen in society or paraded along with the intimates of the ruler. God has vouchsafed in his revelations a warning against the society of the wicked. Do not choose a servant from among them, but leave them to the curse of the accursed. For the earth cries out against their wickedness and is about to heave and swallow all. Turn your eyes to other countries and you will find the Jews are outcast. Dogs, why should you be alone? Be different and bring them near. When in all the land they are kept afar, I came to live in Granada. I saw them frolicking there. They divide up the city into provinces, with one of their cursed men everywhere. They collect all the revenues, they munch and they crunch. They dress in the finest clothes while you wear the meanest. They are the trustees of your secrets, yet how can traitors be trusted? Others eat a dirham's worth afar, while they are near and dine well. Their chief ape has marbled his house, and led the finest spring water to it. Our affairs are now in his hands, and we stand at his door. He laughs at God and our religion. Hasten to slaughter him as an offering, sacrifice him, for he is a precious thing. Do not consider it a breach of faith to kill them. The breach of faith would be to let them carry on. They violated our covenant with them. God watches his own people, and the people of God will prevail." Ishaq referred to the Jews as apes multiple times because the Koran depicts Allah transforming Sabbath-breaking Jews into apes and pigs. In chapter 2 verses 63-65, chapter 5 verses 59-60, and chapter 7 166. The Muslims of Granada heeded Ishaq's call. In 1066, rioting Muslims, enraged by the humiliation of a Jew ruling over Muslims, murdered 4,000 Jews in Granada. The mad and Muslim mob crucified Ibn Nagrilla along with that and plundered the homes of the Jews. The Christians continued meanwhile to advance in Spain. In a major defeat for Islamic Al-Andalus, the forces of King Alfonso VI of Castile and Leon captured Toledo, the old capital of Visigothic Spain, in 1085. The leaders of the various taifas, alarmed, in 1086 called for help from the Almoravids, a Berber Muslim dynasty had taken control of Morocco and its environs in the middle of the 11th century. The Almoravids, fearsome in appearance for their practice of wearing veils over the lower half of their faces, which they did to protect themselves from the twin threats of desert sands and evil spirits, entered Spain swiftly. Their king, Ibn Tashfin, sent a messenger to Alfonso VI, offering him the standard Islamic choices for the people of the book. Alfonso wrote back a contemptuous refusal. When he received the paper containing this message, he turned it over and wrote on the back, "What will happen you shall see." What Alfonso saw was nothing that he wanted to see. The battle at the village of Sagrajas, north of Badajoz, was an unmitigated disaster for the Christians. Alfonso lost over half of his army. When it was over, the Muslims beheaded the Christian corpses and arranged their heads into piles. The muezzins then climbed atop the piles of heads, called the Muslims to prayer. Ibn Tashfin and the Almoravids had stopped the momentum of the Christians in Spain and ensured that Al-Andalus would endure, but the whole situation was nonetheless unprecedented. The forces of jihad had never had this much trouble holding a territory they had conquered for Islam, and seldom, if ever, would again. Even as the Almoravids united the taifas under their rule and continued to wage jihad against the Christians, the Muslims were still quite often on the defensive. The Christians were determined not to let Spain be Islamicized, and they kept pushing against the Muslim domains. Alfonso VI was thus determined even in defeat. In the wake of the disaster, he sent out appeals for help to Christian leaders all over Spain and France, warning them that the Almoravid advance deeply endangered Christianity in Spain and asking them to come join him in the defence of Christendom. Alfonso sent one of these appeals to Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, a Castilian warrior with whom Alfonso had a long history. Rodrigo had been a Castilian commander under King Sancho II of Castile, the son of Fernando I, Ferdinand the Great. Fernando had been king of Castile and Leon. When he died, Sancho became king of Castile, and his brother Alfonso became king of Leon. A third brother, Garcia, became king of Galicia. Sancho, suspecting that Alfonso intended to make war upon his two brothers and unite their kingdoms under his rule, struck preemptively. His commander Rodrigo defeated Alfonso in battle, and Sancho became king of Leon as well as Castile. Soon afterward, however, Sancho was murdered. Since he had no children, his kingdoms passed into the possession of his elder brother, who was none other than the one he had just warned against and deposed, Alfonso. Rodrigo and a group of other Castilian noblemen then forced Alfonso to swear solemnly and repeatedly that he had not been involved in Sancho's murder. Alfonso had no choice but to comply, but his heart began to burn in bitter resentment toward those who had humiliated him, but principally Rodrigo, whom he eventually exiled. Rodrigo was a Christian. He knew well what the warriors of jihad had in store for the Christians of Spain, but the Christian king whom he had served had exiled him. Whether out of necessity or desire for revenge or both, Rodrigo offered his services to Al-Mu'tamin ibn Hud, the king of the Muslim Taifa of Zaragoza. He fought so valiantly in the service of the Muslims that they began to call him El Said, the Master, which in Spanish folklore became El Cid. By that name, El Cid, Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar has become one of the great heroes of Spanish history and the central figure of the Canto de Mio Cid, the renowned Spanish epic poem. For when he received Alfonso's appeal, he returned and again took up the struggle against the Almoravids. He took the city of Valencia from the Muslims and in 1097 defeated the jihadis decisively at Bahrain, near Gandia, in southeast Spain. When El Cid died in 1099, the Christians of Spain controlled 2/3 of the Iberian Peninsula. The momentum of the jihad had been decisively broken, and the impetus for more initiatives against the Muslims came continuously from the systematic mistreatment of the Christians who still lived in the Islamic domains. Even when they were not facing active persecution, if Christians and Jews didn't abide by the restrictions placed upon them as dhimmis, they could, in accordance with the Sharia, be lawfully killed or sold into slavery. Around 1100, the Muslim governing official and poet Ibn Abdun detailed the rules for dhimmis in Seville. A Muslim must not act as a Messiah to a Jew or Christian, must not clear their rubbish nor clean their latrines. In fact, the Jew and the Christian are more suited for such work, which are degrading tasks. A Muslim must not act as a guide or stableman for an animal owned by a Jew or Christian, must not act as their donkey driver or hold the stirrup for them. If it be noticed that a Muslim contravenes these prohibitions, he shall be rebuked. It is forbidden to sell a coat that once belonged to a leper to a Jew or Christian, unless the buyer is informed of its origin. Likewise, if this garment once belonged to a debauched person. No tax officer or policeman, Jew or Christian, may be allowed to wear the dress of an aristocrat, not of a jurist, nor of a wealthy individual. On the contrary, they must be detested and avoided. It is forbidden to accost them with the greeting, "Peace be upon you." In effect, Satan has gained the mastery over them and caused them to forget God's remembrance. Those are Satan's party. Why? Satan's party, surely they are the losers. Koran, chapter 58, verse 20. A distinctive sign must be imposed upon them in order that they may be recognised, and this will be for them a form of disgrace. If the dhimmis violated any of these provisions or any of the others, including physicians being able to heal Muslims, then forced and remind them daily of the subjugation, they could be sold into slavery. In 1126, several thousand Christians were sent to Morocco to serve as slaves. Once again, the Muslim leadership was acting within the bounds of its right to kill or enslave dhimmis who violated the terms of their protection agreement. Indeed, Umayyad Spain became the centre of the Islamic slave trade. Muslim buyers could purchase sex slave girls as young as 11 years old, as well as slave boys for sex as well, or slave boys raised to become brave slave soldiers. Also for sale were eunuchs, useful for guarding harems. Blonde slaves seized in jihadi raids on Christian nations north of Al-Andalus were especially prized, fetched high prices. Slave traders would use makeup to whiten the faces and dye to lighten the hair of darker slaves so that they could get more money for them. A 12th century witness of the sale of sex slaves described the market. The merchant tells the slave girls to act in a coquettish manner with the old men and with the timid men among the potential buyers to make them crazy with desires. The merchant paints red the tips of the fingers of a white slave. He paints in gold those of a black slave, and he dresses them all in transparent clothes, the white female slaves in pink and the black ones in yellow and red. If the girls did not cooperate, of course, they would be beaten or killed. The Andalusian slave market became particularly important in the 11th century, when two of the other principal markets from which the Muslims drew slaves, Central Asia and Southeastern Europe, dried up. The Slavs by this time had converted to Christianity and were no longer interested in selling their people as slaves to Islamic traders. In Central Asia, meanwhile, the Turks had converted to Islam. The primary market for slaves among Muslims was for non-Muslims, as enslaving fellow Muslims was considered a violation of the Quran's requirement to be merciful to one another in chapter 48, verses 29. Hence, Muslim slave traders had to look elsewhere for merchandise. Outside of Spain, the jihad, at least against infidels, was relatively quiet during the 10th century, as the Abbasids struggled to hold on to their domains, battling not only the Qarmations, but the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate that had been established in 909, and ultimately wrested much of North Africa and the Middle East from Abbasid control. That the jihad against unbelievers went through a period of relative quiet was not due to any reform in Islam, or to reconsideration or rejection of the exhortation in the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad to wage war against subjugate unbelievers. It wasn't pursued as relentlessly as it had been in the 7th and 8th centuries, solely because the various Muslim factions were preoccupied with infighting, such that they did not have the resources to carry the battle to the infidels the way they once had done. But the jihad would be taken up again as soon as any significant number of Muslims had the will, the unity, and sufficient resources to do so. At the beginning of the 11th century, there arose a Muslim commander who was like Ibn Zayd in two important ways. He was full of zeal for Islam and had the valour and ruthlessness to bring that zeal to jihad warfare. His name was Muhammad of Ghazni, a native of Khorasan who revived the long-dormant jihad against India and greatly extended Islam's presence on the subcontinent. For 30 years, he terrorised non-Muslims in what's today northeast Afghanistan, Pakistan, northwest India. In 994, he became governor of Khorasan, bestowing upon himself the title of Sultan, governmental power. Mahmud swiftly began to expand his domains, all in the name of Islam. His domains were nominally under the suzerainty of the Abbasid Caliph. When Mahmud secured the Caliph Al-Qadir bin Allah recognition in 999, he pledged annual jihad raids against India. He didn't manage to invade that frequently, but he did lead 17 large-scale jihad incursions into the subcontinent. The 13th century Muslim historian Minhaj al-Siraj Juzjani, author of the Tabaqat-e-Naziri, A History of Islam's Rise, noted that as Mahmud waged war and jihad in India, he converted so many thousands of idol temples into masjids. He broke the idols whenever he could, so as to demonstrate the power of Islam and the superiority of Alaska, to the gods of the people of India. When he defeated the Hindu ruler Jaipal in 1001, he had Jaipal paraded about in the streets so that his sons and chieftains might see him in that condition of shame, bonds and disgrace, and that the fear of Islam might fly abroad through the country of the infidels. Mahmud of Ghazni made an immense effort to conquer Gujarat, according to Zakaria ibn Muhammad, another 13th century Muslim historian, because he hoped that if he was able to destroy Gujarat entirely, its inhabitants would be shot and demoralised, and would convert to Islam en masse. The people of Gujarat, however, did not submit but resisted. 50,000 were killed. Entering one Hindu temple in Gujarat, Mahmud was overcome with anger at seeing the idols. Raising his battle axe, he hit one with full force, breaking into pieces. The pieces were carried to Ghazni and placed at the threshold of the mosque as a sign of the victory of Islam over the idols and superiority of Alaska to them. Mahmud proceeded with a massive army of jihadis to Thanesar in Hindustan, where he had heard that there was a magnificent temple in which was placed an idol, Jagarsam, that people from all over the region venerated. Anandapala, the Hindu ruler of the Shahi dynasty in modern-day eastern Afghanistan and northeast Pakistan, heard of Mahmud's advance and sought to make peace, sending an envoy to Mahmud offering the Sultan 50 elephants if he would abandon the jihad against Jagarsam. Mahmud ignored the offer, but when he and his men arrived in Thanesar, he had found the city entirely empty of people. Nonetheless, there was plenty to plunder. They roamed the empty streets, seizing and destroying all the idols from the temple. They had transported Jagarsam to Ghazni, where Mahmud ordered that the now broken idol be set in front of the mosque, that the Muslims would trample upon its pieces on their way in and out for prayer. The Kitat-i-Yamini, an 11th century account of Mahmud of Ghazni's reign up to 1020, by the Muslim historian Abu Nasr Muhammad al-Ibbi, contains another account of Mahmud's attacking Thanesar, apparently during one of his other invasions of India. Al-Ibbi recorded that the leader of Thanesar was obstinate in his infidelity and denial of God, so the Sultan marched against him with his valiant warriors for the purpose of planting the standards of Islam and extirpating idolatry. Mahmud and his jihadis showed no mercy. The blood of the infidels flowed so copiously that the stream was discoloured, notwithstanding its purity, and people were unable to drink it. Al-Whitby was sure this was a sign of the divine favour upon the Muslims. The victory was gained by God's grace, who has established Islam. The same historian boasted that Mahmud purified Hind from idolatry and raised mosques therein, but the Sultan wasn't finished. In 1013 he marched with a large jihadi army toward Lahore, the capital of Hindustan, where he found a Buddhist temple. Inside the temple was a stone bearing an inscription saying, according to Al-Whitby, that the temple had been founded 50,000 years ago. Mahmud was surprised at the ignorance of these people, because those who believe in the true faith represent that only 7,000 years have elapsed since the creation of the world. What a delusional freak, eh, brothers and sisters? Mahmud and his men went on to Nandana, the capital of the Kabul Shahi kingdom under King Anandapal. Here again the jihadis slaughtered the population indiscriminately and destroyed the temples. Al-Whitby recounted, the Sultan returned in the rear of immense booty. Slaves were so plentiful that they became very cheap, and men of respectability in the native land were degraded by becoming slaves of common shopkeepers. For such is the goodness of Alaska, who bestows honour on his own religion, grades in fidelity. 5 years later, Mahmud entered Hindustan again and marched toward the fortress of Mahaban. Al-Whitby said that the infidels deserted the fort and tried to cross the foaming river, but many of them were slain, taken or drowned. Nearly 50,000 men were killed. Then at Mathura, Al-Whitby added, the Sultan gave orders that all the temples should be burnt with naphtha and fire, levelled with the ground. At Kanauj, the Muslim historian continued, there were nearly 10,000 temples. Many of the inhabitants of the place fled in consequence of witnessing the fate of their deaf and dumb idols. Those who did not fly were put to death. The Sultan gave his soldiers leave to plunder and take prisoners. Then at Strawa, the Muslims paid no regard to the booty till they had satiated themselves with the slaughter of the infidels, worshippers of sun and fire. The friends of Allah searched the bodies of the slain for 3 days in order to obtain booty. The booty amounted, gold and silver, rubies and pearls, nearly to 3,000 dirhams. The number of prisoners may be conceived from the fact that each was sold for 2 to 10 dirhams. They were afterwards taken to Ghazni, and merchants came from distant cities to purchase them, so that the countries of Marwan, Nar, Iraq and Khorasan were filled with them, and the fair and the dark, and the rich and the poor were commingled in one common slavery.